NBA draft fans, welcome back to Utility Sports, and in today's video I am coming at you with a 2022 NBA mock draft, but this is something brand new, never done before on the channel. I've never seen it done, but I think it's going to be really fun, and I think it's something that a lot of you are probably looking for. In my last NBA mock draft, a lot of you asked to simulate a lottery, and even though I'm not specifically doing that in today's video, my real thoughts here are you guys want something fresh, you want something new, specifically with the NBA draft, and the lottery is not until May 17th, so we've got quite a bit of time yet. We're still well over 2 weeks away from the time I'm recording this, and I thought this would be a really fun video. It's a 2022 NBA mock draft with the first overall pick edition, and you'll get exactly what I mean here. Before we jump into it though, if you guys are enjoying the content you're seeing here at Utility Sports, I know a lot of you don't actually hit that subscribe button. It'd be really awesome to have you subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 10,000 subscribers. We'd love to have you be one of those subscribers on the channel. We have a bunch of giveaways planned in the future and a lot of really fun stuff. So again, please subscribe, maybe hit that notification bell as well. That would be really awesome and helpful. So let's go ahead and jump forward now into explaining what this video is. So what exactly is this video? First of all, I'm mocking only the first overall selection. So you might be saying, wow, how is this video X amount of minutes? I see at the bottom right now, it's way longer than one pick. That's because I'm doing it for each lottery team. We're going to break down the odds that they get the first overall selection and who I think they would actually take with that first overall pick, which I think is going to be really fun. So I know that I'm only mocking the first overall pick, but I'm essentially doing it 14 times, once for each lottery team. And there's also a few wrinkles in here that I think will be helpful to talk about. Oklahoma City Thunder fans, I think you're going to have a fun surprise as well. So we'll stay tuned for that. We'll talk about specifically what could happen with that. And then part of the fun part of this video is we really get to talk basketball. We're going to get to analyze fit, look at the value of each selection, and maybe the long-term projections of what I think some of these players could be. I'm going to keep some of that part short because I don't want to, draw on too much about how good I think certain players can be, especially when I have them mocked multiple times across different teams. But I think it is a really fun mental exercise to maybe picture what the draft could look like before the actual lottery even takes place, because as you know, teams do jump around a lot, specifically under Adam Silver's era. Think about the New Orleans Pelicans jumping up for Zion Williamson. We also saw the Grizzlies jump up to be able to get John Morant. We saw the Lakers pick jump up to 4. That really, probably fueled a trade for Anthony Davis. So there was a lot of different things that kind of shook out and changed the course of the league, and the lottery is really important for that. And I think this will be a really fun video. And the reason we're doing this is because there's a crazy good top 4 this year with no clear, obvious number 1. Now, I think there's 2 guys that probably stand out as most likely for mocked picks. Now, remember, this is not necessarily what I would do, but I think what would happen if this team were to win the lottery. And there's 4 guys here that I think a lot of people would consider worthy of the number 1 overall selection this year. And of course, going from left to right, that's Jabari Smith, the forward from Auburn, Jaden Ivey, the guard from Purdue, who I absolutely love, Paolo Banchero from Duke, who I think at the start of the year was probably going to be the 2nd overall pick if there wasn't a college basketball season. I think a lot of people just assume Chet Holmgren, who's furthest on the right, would have been 1st overall and Paolo Banchero 2nd. But the year played out. Ivy really flew up boards. Jabari Smith flew up boards. And now it's a real open race between these 4 guys. So let's go ahead and go through it. We're going to start with the Rockets. They have the best lottery odds. They have a 14% chance to be picking number 1 and a 48% chance to be picking in the top 4 and a 100% chance to be picking top 5. So they're going to have a high selection this year. But if they won the lottery and with that 14% chance they punch their ticket 1st overall, I think that the Houston Rockets would select Jabari Smith, the forward out of Auburn. And I think it's really close. Rockets fans probably not going to want to hear this. I think they would really strongly consider Chet Holmgren. I mean, it's very close. Jabari Smith, more of a true 4, whereas Chet Holmgren, I would label more as maybe a 4.5, where he's going to play some at the 4, some at the 5, kind of what we've seen from Evan Mobley this past year with Cleveland. But for me with Jabari Smith, the reasoning I went here is he's a very good perimeter defender. I think he's going to be able to keep guys in front of him out on the perimeter defensively. He's also got enough length and athleticism to be an intriguing shot blocker at the NBA level. Not that he's going to be a rim protector or a true anchor to a defense, like I think Holmgren could potentially become. But what I do think with Jabari Smith is he's a player that really fits what Houston needs. He's a floor spacing perimeter scorer who can put the ball on the deck a little bit. I think he still has to progress in that area for sure. but he's got some flashes that showcase what he could potentially be, especially on a bigger court with more spacing, more talent around him offensively. You put him next to Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green. You have an intriguing trio. And then obviously Jabari Smith becomes probably the best defensive player on this team on day one, which that's a lot to ask from a rookie. It's not going to change this team overnight, but I think long-term, you're looking at building something really nice in Houston with the Jabari Smith selection. And remember, this is just my thoughts, my predictions. We're going to have a lot more information as we actually get the lottery and then teams start really considering who they're going to take once they know what selection they actually have. So, this could be way wrong. You could be watching this closer to the draft and say, wow, this is way off. I'm recording this in the end, near the end of April. And then teams obviously start to consider who they'd really want. And I think Houston, just given their roster construction at this point, if they had first overall, I think they take Jabari Smith with a really strong thought process behind either him or Chet Holmgren. Then, if we had the Orlando Magic first overall, which is funny here, I almost said second overall because I'm so used to the NBA mocks going from Houston to Orlando. But again, with the first overall pick, they have also a 14% chance to be picking number one and really good odds to be in the top four. Who I think the Orlando Magic would select, I would opt for Jabari Smith again here. And I think this is actually a much stronger reasoning on why they would go with Jabari Smith instead of Chet Holmgren. In fact, I think their number two option would maybe be Jaden Ivey. And then third, I think they would look at Paolo Banchero. But the reason I think that they go Jabari Smith here simply is they've got defensive players there. They need an offensive focal point type of guy. And I think Jabari Smith is someone who at some point in the NBA is going to be capable of averaging 20 plus points a game. Right now, I just don't believe Orlando has that. I think adding back in Jonathan Isaac is going to be huge for this team, specifically defensively. And they were actually a pretty decent defensive team this past year. Not good by any stretch, but re-adding Jonathan Isaac back into the mix. And then you put Jabari Smith with that. That's a really intriguing front court of Wendell Carter Jr., Jonathan Isaac, and Jabari Smith with also Franz Wagner. I mean, there's a lot of talent there then. So you're looking at the team really just needs an offensive player. I think Banchero makes a lot of sense, Ivy as well, but Jabari Smith probably just based on value and fit makes the most sense here for me for the Orlando Magic. Then the Detroit Pistons. With the first overall pick for the Detroit Pistons, again, a 14% chance because of the lottery rule changed back a few years ago. Remember, the first overall pick used to be a 25% chance for the team with the worst record. Adam Silver reshaped the league. Now it's 14% for the top three teams. And with the Pistons here, I think that they would probably look at Jabari Smith as well, with probably, I would have to guess, Chet Holmgren or Jaden Ivey being their second in consideration. And I really love the Ivy to Detroit fit. Don't get me wrong, Pistons fans, but I think Jabari Smith would just be the most likely pick here first overall. And now you're saying, oh, we're 3 for 3 on Jabari Smith. Is that how this whole video is going to go? No, stay tuned. Okay, there's a lot that could break down and really change what I think could happen here first overall. But for Detroit here, again, I think Jabari Smith makes a lot of sense. Just watching the Pistons this year, I think they need more length and size. And I think he's also a good athlete. So you put him next to Isaiah Stewart or Marvin Bagley, he can stretch the floor. And I think at some point in his career too, Jabari Smith might play some small ball 5, which would be very, very fun to watch and give you a really hyper offense speed type of unit on the floor. And with his length and size, I mean, he could match certain bigs fairly well. Now, I don't think it's going to be usable against every single lineup, and don't think I'm saying, oh, put him on Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. I'm not saying that. But I think, certain situations he's going to be able to function there. So for Detroit, does give you a little bit of a fun lineup. Him and Cade Cunningham, I think, would be a really good duo offensively. And I think they complement each other well, just with the way that they operate. Cade Cunningham really good with the ball in his hands. And I think Jabari Smith very comfortable without the ball. So those two, I think, could make magic happen in Detroit. And I think it would be a really good start to a potential dynasty even for the Detroit Pistons. Now Oklahoma City, and this is the fun team to talk about here. And we're going to get to why after this selection. But with their own pick, they have 12.5% chance to be picking number one, which is pretty good odds again. Now, Sam Presti, the Oklahoma City Thunder fan base, they're going to be crossing their fingers the entire offseason because the way that they're building their team, the way that they're going about it is very reliant on lottery and the ping pong balls. And if it doesn't go right for Oklahoma City, they could potentially be picking as low as 7 or 8, which I don't think that's going to happen. Don't get me wrong, but it's a possibility. And if it does, it would be devastating for Oklahoma City in what is one of the most important drafts for this rebuild around Shea, Josh Giddey, Lou Dort, and around Trey Mann and everything that Sam Presti wants to do there. But hypothetically, if they get the first overall pick, knock on wood here, the Oklahoma City Thunder, I think, would take Chet Holmgren. Now, you see Chet Holmgren finally makes his appearance onto the list with the 4th team, and that's Chet Holmgren to Oklahoma City. And the reason why I think this is when you look at a player and you look at Chet Holmgren in comparison to Jabari Smith, I think he's a little bit further along in his playmaking. I think he's got a little bit more upside as a playmaker. And I think, quite frankly, he's got the most upside in the class on the defensive end of the floor. Now, I don't think his upside overall is the highest, but defensively, I think it for sure is. And then when you look at what he could be as a screen and roller and someone who can pick and pop with those guards, can space the floor, is one of the best second jumpers in the class, is a very good rim protector, great timing. He has potential to be a defensive anchor, and that's not something you say lightly when it comes to the NBA draft. And Chet Holmgren, to me, it's hard to find a comparison because of how slight he is and how unique of a talent he is. I kind of liken him to a blend of Rudy Gobert and Kristaps Porzingis, which is a really intriguing combination because those two players are vastly different. But I think offensively, he's got some of what KP does, where, he's not going to be a great post-up player. He's not going to really move you down low, but he's going to face you up. And I think he's a more talented passer than Kristaps Porzingis. He can also knock down the 3 ball with regularity. And when he's given an open floor, he can punch one home too. So he's good athletically. And I think when he's not in congested traffic is going to be a good offensive player with even better passing upside than a guy like Kristaps Porzingis, excuse me. But then when you look at him defensively, he's got some of that anchor mold to him that Rudy Gobert has, where I think he maybe even switches out in space a little bit better. Probably not as dependable one-on-one in the post defensively like Rudy Gobert is against some of the best players in the league, such as Joel Embiid. But what I do think is, as a help defender and rim protector off the basketball, not including post-ups, that's very, very usable. And if you're worried about the post-up game, I'm going to tell you this right now. Karl Anthony Towns, one of the highest post usage players in the league, averaged 6 post-ups a game. So if that's your biggest red flag defensively, if you feel like your defense can get away with 6 post-ups, you're going to be pretty solid, especially there's other ways to mitigate that. We've seen teams in the past try and put wings onto bigs and then try and help off of that and double. Now you have to be creative, and it is a little bit of a weakness for Chet, but I do think the upside here is immense. Then we move on to Oklahoma City again, and this pick comes from the Clippers. It's a 1.5% chance to pick number 1 and about a 7% chance to fall into the top 4. So again, not great odds here. Of course, this comes from the Paul George to LA trade, but we already know who I think they would take with the first overall pick, and that's Chet Holmgren. Now I want to talk about the possibility that maybe they land in number 2 and 1. They could potentially have picks 1 and 2. They could have picks 1 and 3. They could have picks 1 and 4, maybe. So knowing that they have Chet Holmgren, they could maybe come back and double down and take Jabari Smith. And then all of a sudden, one of the worst front courts in the league becomes one of the best when you look at long-term projection. I think that Chet Holmgren and Jabari Smith in one front court together would be crazy. I also think Paolo Banchero would be on the table. This is just one part here. Again, this is not going to be the first overall pick, but with their other pick, if it does move up into the top 4, Oklahoma City, again, I talked about how they're preying on ping pong balls. It's possible that they pay out. And if they do, they can cash out on Chet Holmgren and Jabari Smith in the same draft. Watch out, because you have a core of Josh Giddey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, you have Lou Dort, you have Trey Mann, who I think are rotation players. Then you come in with 2 more big dogs in Jabari Smith, Chet Holmgren. Watch out. Moving into the next team who could potentially be picking first overall, and that is the Indiana Pacers. They have a 10.5% chance to pick number 1. And this is the highest we're going to ever see Indiana. They are guaranteed a top 9 selection in this draft. More than likely will be top 5 or top 6. And if they get number 1, it would be huge. This team has not taken a player in the top 9 since 1989. And the last time that they took someone in the top 10, it was Paul George over a decade ago. So this team just does not know what it's like being in the lottery. It's a testament to how good this team is. They're not used to being in the top 10, but this year they're guaranteed to be. So with the first overall pick, I think Indiana would also take Jabari Smith. Part of the reasoning as to why here, I consider Jaden Ivey, and I know the Purdue-Indiana connection, it's fun, but first overall, I think if Jabari Smith's here, they just take him. I also did consider Chet Holmgren, but given the fact that Miles Turner is that big for them, that is a rim protector, more of a actual anchor for a defense, and his ability to step out to the three-point line, I think they would look for more of a true-natured 4 in Jabari Smith. And with Ivy, the reason I opted to not go with Ivy here is I think just consensus. A lot of scouts and executives are probably going to view Jabari Smith as the better prospect because he's bigger, lengthier, and was probably on a more national scale this year at Auburn than I think Ivy was at Purdue, which I think does really impact draft status. And to be honest, a lot of GMs, they kind of do like to follow consensus. They don't like to switch it up because it does lead to a fan base questioning your decision making a lot. And typically, we do have a good feel for who maybe goes first or second overall. And I think Jabari Smith probably does out edge Jaden Ivey here. Then also just the Tyrese Halliburton factor. They want to put the ball in Halliburton's hands. Ivy probably does mix with that a little bit and mess that up a little, not in a bad way. I think Ivy's awesome, but I think Smith probably the more natural fit, which is why I opted for him here if I'm Indiana picking first overall. And again, this is not what I do, but this is what I think would happen. So if they are picking first, this is what I would see them happening to go with. Now Portland here, they have a 9% chance at pick 1. Unfortunately, they do not have 2 lottery picks anymore after the Pelicans moved out of the lottery by getting into the playoffs through the play-in tournament. And the Trailblazers here, 9% chance. I have them going with Chet Holmgren. And again, he's that 4-5 combo, but I think it fits here with Jusuf Nurkic, who maybe isn't as much of a defensive anchor. And there's a vast difference between a guy like Miles Turner and also Jusuf Nurkic in the way that they play, the way that they operate. And I think that Holmgren is a much more natural fit next to a Nurkic because he's more of a rim protector presence. You would have to get creative with where you put Nurkic defensively, but this is one of those opportunities where Holmgren maybe gets to show how special he is because you put Nurkic on the post-up bigs and have Holmgren work off of that, which would be really, really awesome to watch. And I think Portland, a team that's really craving to build a defensive identity, going with the player that I think has the highest defensive upside just makes a lot of sense. I know that, a guy like Jabari Smith is going to be intriguing. I just don't think Jaden Ivey's on their radar here. And I think realistically, Paolo Banchero, probably the 3rd best forward in this class behind Holmgren and Jabari Smith. So I think for me, with what I'm looking at here, I think Holmgren is the one that makes the most sense. Billups wants to get better defensively. Holmgren's really great defensively, and then also the offensive presence for Holmgren stretching the floor around Nurkic, and I think they could actually build an intriguing 2-man game in the high-low post as well, which is something Nurkic, he's a pretty talented passer in his own right. I don't think that gets talked enough about in the NBA, so I think Portland would actually really consider Chet Holmgren here. Then Sacramento, and the Kings are an interesting one because, of course, they drafted Domantas Sabonis, who's a very good skill-oriented passing center in today's league, but he has his own defensive limitations as well. But you look at the lottery odds here, 7.5% chance to pick number 1. And I think my train of thought really stays similar between Sacramento and Portland, where I just look at Chet Holmgren being the player that does make the most sense here. Think about the skill passing that Sacramento could have on the floor with Domantas Sabonis and Chet Holmgren filling out the front court. I think that realistically, if you go Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith or Chet Holmgren, you are really, really improving your front court play over Chimezie Metu, who did take a massive step forward this year, really improved his game, and I think fits off of Sabonis well, but I see him more as a off the bench type of role player. And if you bring in someone like Chet Holmgren here, his caliber, you have different players to run your offense out of. Domantas Sabonis, a very good passer I talked about. He and Chet Holmgren could be really, really great together. Think about how good Drew Timme and Chet Holmgren were together at the collegiate level, including some big wins specifically toward the end of the season in the tournament. And then you really upgrade Drew Timme into a player like Domantas Sabonis. There's a lot of talent here. Sacramento needs to get better at shooting. Chet Holmgren shot 39% from 3 this past year for Gonzaga. I just think it makes too much sense to pass on Chet here. And I think Chet's defensive capabilities do kind of hide some of Sabonis's defensive limitations. Then we move on to New Orleans. And if New Orleans gets the first overall pick, oh my goodness, watch out. Because this is a team that made the playoffs without Zion Williamson playing a single game. They had a terrible start to the season. Brand new head coach, and they still overcame all of this, made it to the postseason. Then next year, they'll get Zion Williamson back, assuming that he, maybe ever plays again for the Pelicans. And then first overall, I think they would take Chet Holmgren. I saw a meme on the internet, which is awesome. I think you guys are going to appreciate this, where it says that there's a foolproof plan where everything's to get this development here right for the New Orleans Pelicans. If they get the first overall pick, they take Chet Holmgren, and then they have Chet Holmgren literally shadow Zion Williamson, and anything that Zion Williamson orders to eat, Chet Holmgren eats it, which I think was pretty funny and a really, really good joke just based on where Chet Holmgren's at physically in comparison to where Zion Williamson is. But I think this is just the most no-brainer selection, honestly, throughout this. New Orleans probably looking for a big who can really protect the rim. I know Jackson Hayes is solid. I do like Valanciunas as well. I think he's a good player. But this is just about upside here, and I think Holmgren is so special that if this pick does convey from the Lakers, it's going to be absolutely incredible watching him with Zion and BI and CJ McCollum. I mean, this team would become really, really good. Then we move on to San Antonio here, who has a 4.5% chance at pick 1. And to be honest with you guys, I just have a feeling that San Antonio is going to move up into the top 4. Sometimes I have these inklings. Last year, I had that inkling about Toronto. I just felt that they would. And of course, they did and got Scotty Barnes. And I just really feel it. That San Antonio is going to move up into the top 4. I just really think it. I'm not trying to talk it into existence. I'm not trying to manifest it. But I just really have this feeling that it's going to happen. So if it does on draft night, you're going to know who to thank, Spurs fans. But with that 4.5% chance at pick 1, if they got it, I think they would take Jabari Smith. It's clear they're looking for a forward who can defend and can also protect the rim around Pirtle. And I think they're also looking for more offensive capabilities. I think you move Keldon Johnson back to the 3, you play with a little bit more strength and length, and putting Jabari Smith at the 4, he's just an awesome player. I've gone on and on about Jabari Smith. My analysis on him hasn't changed from the last team I thought would take him number 1. He's just really good. And San Antonio, you add Jabari Smith in, I think he's a really good fit on this roster. I wouldn't rule out Chet Holmgren, but I think Jabari Smith is the one that makes the absolute most sense. Then Washington, and Washington's really interesting. They have a 3% chance at pick 1. There's a lot of rumors around Bradley Beal. I know they're kind of quieting down, but I think that what's going to happen is he's going to opt into his contract and then maybe ask for a trade. I think that is a real possibility. I hope for Washington fans that it doesn't happen. Bradley Beal's awesome, and I hope the Wizards do play really, really well. I think they did a good job in that Kristaps Porzingis trade. And they've got a lot of forwards on this team. So I don't think it should be a surprise here that I actually think the Wizards would take Jaden Ivey first overall if they got it, or maybe explore a trade down to say 2 or 3 and hope that Ivey's still there for them. I think that would be on the table as well. We saw that happen a few years ago where Boston got the number 1 pick, traded to Philly. Philly took Markelle Fultz, and Boston at 3 took Jason Tatum. Of course, we know how that trade aged, but I think Washington would really, really want Jaden Ivey because this is a team that's been hunting for their point guard for quite some time. Since John Wall went down with his Achilles injury there in Washington, they've then made a trade for Russell Westbrook. Didn't quite work out. They traded Russell Westbrook, signed Spencer Dinwiddie. That didn't work out. Traded Spencer Dinwiddie. They clearly just want to find a long-term point guard. And Jaden Ivey, to me, you guys know how I feel about this kid. Absolutely awesome player. And I think this should show too that I'm not really biased in my mock drafts because to me, Jaden Ivey's, I think, the best player in the class, and I've not mocked him first overall to any team so far besides Washington. So I hope this shows that I'm not really biased towards specific players. And I think Washington is the unique example that does make a lot of sense for Ivey because specifically with where they're at, they need a point guard, and their forward room is really loaded. They traded for Kristaps. They've got a few nice centers on that roster. Thomas Bryant is headed toward free agency, but I don't think this fit makes as much sense for Chet Holmgren because they have Kristaps, and then they also have Rui Hachimura, Kyle Kuzma, and they've in recent drafts as well. They've went out and taken guys like Corey Kispert and Denny Avdia. So they've got a lot of forwards. I don't think that they could afford to take another one. I think they would go guard here with Jaden Ivey. Then we have the Knicks, 2% chance at number 1. And I think this was the hardest team to project who they would take first overall. And for me, Knicks fans, I really want help on who you think they would take because this one was really, really challenging to me. And this is an example of me admitting I don't think I know everything, specifically about a team like the Knicks, who I think they would for sure target first overall. I really, really struggled with this one. But what I think would happen is I think they would take Chet Holmgren. Mitchell Robinson is headed toward free agency, and it's very likely he's gone. I made a Knicks offseason preview, and I did spend a lot of time researching and really evaluating this team. And I still feel like it's tough to say, hey, they're not going to take Jaden Ivey because they've been hunting for a point guard almost as long as Washington, if not longer. So I think, there's a real difficulty here with New York. I could see him taking Jabari Smith. I could see him taking Chet Holmgren. I could see him even taking Jaden Ivey. I just opted for the player who I think a lot of teams are going to consider the best prospect, and that's Chet Holmgren because I think they're going to look at him defensively. And when you have Tom Thibodeau as the head coach, that's going to be where the emphasis is. He's going to look defense. And for me, I think Chet Holmgren, again, the defensive upside is going to be immense in his potential fit in New York, especially as Mitchell Robinson heads toward free agency. Then Charlotte here. They have a 1% chance at pick number 1, so very unlikely. And in 1,000 combinations, they've got 10 of them that work out to having them be the first overall selection. But if they get that first pick, I think they take Chet Holmgren, and this is another no-brainer one here for me, just given what they have on their roster. They're clearly looking for rim protection. They explored trades for Jakob Poeltl at the trade deadline, ended up settling on Montrezl Harrell, but that clearly was not what they needed. They need to get better defensively around LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges, and I think the best way to do that is bringing in a guy like Chet Holmgren. Now, Jabari Smith would be awesome there as well. And again, I think the top 4 players are all really good. I just think that Chet Holmgren is the one that makes the most sense here in Charlotte, and I think would really solidify their rim protection. Now, I know Hornets fans are going to say, whoa, we took Kai Jones last year. Okay, you also took James Bouknight before you took Kai Jones. So I think Bouknight is the player that you guys should consider as a better player, because I think Bouknight is just quite frankly better than Kai Jones. And then you also need to look at the forwards that you have there in Kelly Oubre, PJ Washington, Gordon Hayward, who maybe gets traded, but still Miles Bridges. There's a lot of good players in Charlotte. I think Holmgren is really bringing what you're missing in terms of the rim protection element. And then we go into Cleveland, the final team here in the lottery, and they have a 0.5% chance. So they have 5 combinations of ping pong balls that would give them the first overall selection, which is crazy. So now what I think would happen here with Cleveland, if they were to win the lottery, is I think they would trade the pick down. I think they would trade out to maybe 2, 3, or 4, bring in more assets, because realistically, I don't think they need to take a guy like Chet Holmgren or Jabari Smith or even Paolo Banchero, because they have pretty much everything set on their roster that you think they would want to have. Evan Mobley's going to keep getting better. He's awesome already. Jarrett Allen is great. Lauri Markkanen's really, really good, especially at playing the 3. That's been a revelation for his career. Then you look at, Colin Sexton, who missed the entire year, basically. He's going to be back. He's a nice contributor. They traded for Karis LeVert, who's good. I don't think Karis LeVert's great, but I think he's good. And Darius Garland is great. Now, Isaac Okoro, former top 10 pick, he needs to come along a little bit still as a shooter. I was hoping when it was his draft that he would. He seemed like he had a great work ethic out of Auburn, but just hasn't worked out maybe the way that they thought. They would, if they did keep the pick, I think it would probably be one of Jabari Smith or Paolo Banchero, because they're the players with the most wing type characteristics in terms of playing the 3 or 2. Now, I don't think either of these guys are ever going to play the 2 in their career, but I mean, if you're Cleveland, you'd be skilled enough if you put out a lineup of Darius Garland, Jabari Smith, Lauri Markkanen, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen. There's enough skill on the floor to get away with that, and you have so much length, but I ultimately think Cleveland would trade down from pick 1. But for the sake of the argument, let's say that they would probably take Jabari Smith with the first overall selection if they did keep it. So here's the final counter. I had 6 teams, including Oklahoma City, take Chet Holmgren. I had 6 teams take Jabari Smith, including Cleveland. 1 team took Jaden Ivey, that was Washington. And I had 0 teams take Paolo Banchero. Again, I think Cleveland would consider him, but out of the forwards available, Holmgren, Smith, and Banchero, I think Banchero is just the 3rd best out of those 3. So I don't think he really gets a lot of first overall pick consideration in reality. And remember, there's only 13 total teams because Oklahoma City had 2 lottery picks here. So I'm not going to count Oklahoma City twice because they are only 1 team, right? So there's 13 teams. Holmgren and Smith split right down the middle, 6 and 6. Ivy takes 1 team, that's Washington, and Banchero ends with 0. Hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video. Again, I know very different, but hopefully really enjoyable. And I hope it does kind of switch up the lottery mocks here for you guys a little bit, because it is fresh, new, fun, and exciting. I'm also hoping to record another big board soon. And I'm also hoping to record another normal full first round mock draft. So if this wasn't necessarily your thing, don't worry. There's going to be more content coming on the channel regarding the NBA draft. Again, thank you all so much. Hopefully you are enjoying the content here. A lot of work, a lot of research and time goes into these. So again, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.